In the weird and wacky world that we call F1, the participants, the related parties, are going to say or do something that make you feel upset, right? Make you not want to be a part of this nonsense that we call F1. And today, this morning, this is one of those times I've got to talk to it. I'm sorry, I have to talk to it. What David Coulthard has said. Let me just check that I'm going live here, because I don't want you guys to miss any of this, because I'm about to go scorched earth for real, for real. Look, here's what David Coulthard has said the other day on the Formula for Success podcast, God tier podcast between David Coulthard, legend of the game, man who stepped into the Williams car after Senna's sad, tragic death, which is worthy of praise in and of itself, alongside Eddie Jordan, who always has a cheeky soundbite in him. Go and check out the FFS podcast. But on this podcast, the latest iteration of David Coulthard had the temerity, the courage, the cheek, the shame to speak out about Lewis Hamilton. Here's what he said. And again, listen, we're talking in the context of all of the chaos and drama and controversy that's going on in F1 at the moment, being Christian Hornergate, FIA scandal, the investigation or lack thereof of all of Mohammed Ben Sulayem's infringements, discretion, all of that stuff, right? This is what David Coulthard had to say. Susie Wolff suing criminal charges, Mohammed Ben Sulayem, FIA, all of that stuff. This is the background and the context. However, this is what David Coulthard had to say. And I paraphrase. It's very interesting. I find this very interesting. Lewis Hamilton talking about transparency, honesty, lack thereof as far as the FIA is concerned. It's always those lot. It's always those people that talk about this in times of controversy. How about you lead by example, Lewis Hamilton? End quote. That's what Coulthard had to say. It's taken me 48 hours to process this and dissect it. And now I'm thinking, what are you talking about, David Coulthard? What are you on about, David Coulthard? When have you, David Coulthard, ever led by example? FFS, no pun intended. When has David Coulthard ever been one to speak up and speak out about transparency at the FIA or other in F1 or the lack thereof? When has David Coulthard ever done that? I don't know. Guys, you're gonna have to tell me in the comments. I have looked. I do due diligence before I come on and start ranting and going scorched earth, Cameron. I do. And I've never seen a time when DC has ever spoken. How very dare you, DC, accuse the one driver of the 20 currently on the grid that has the temerity and cojones to sometimes speak out about the FIA, lack of transparency, lack of honesty. Nobody trusts the FIA in April of 24. Nobody does. The F1 paddock were laughing when the FIA committee exonerated Mohammed Ben Sulayem. What else did you expect? I haven't heard any of the other 19 drivers on the grid talk about this, only Lewis Hamilton. So that's the dude that you accuse. That's the one that you want to take aim at, talking about that you need to lead by example. Lead by example what? That's the one driver, that's the one participant in F1 currently that you can accuse of leading by example, David Coulthard. So what are you talking about? Genuinely, non-rhetorical question. What is DC talking about here? Is there some hidden agenda? Is there some secret that I don't know about that DC's alluding to? Because I can't work this out. I'm losing my mind. F1 sometimes makes you question whether you want to be a fan of it in 2024. Some of the comments of the participants, DC is a commentator still on Channel 4. What are you saying, DC? How very dare you? Again, for the avoidance of doubt, I will reiterate, Lewis Hamilton, whatever you want to say about him, his foibles, yeah, I don't like him, the fashion stuff, is he invested in F1 still in 2022? Whatever you want to say about him, whatever. The one thing you can't leverage against that fella is leading by example. That dude has sponsorship deals coming out of his eyes. Tommy Hilfiger, Bose, bloody Puma. Why would he need to speak out about this stuff? He's not incentivized to. On the contrary, ladies and gents, he's incentivized in terms of his commercial value to not speak out about these things. Whether it's social justice, whether it's FIA, That's why the others don't talk about it, because their commercial value doubles, no triples, the more that they stay silent. So Lewis Hamilton is incentivized then to stay silent. But what does he do? He doesn't stay silent. He speaks out about it yet and still. Holy smokes, David Coulthard. How very dare you? Sometimes you got to fact check these apparent experts' maths. Because when I look at these things, it just doesn't tally. I can't square it. What is David Coulthard talking about? And when you go and listen to the podcast, you will hear this. And this is where I've got to fact check properly, because the maths doesn't maths. Will I am, Jomo, you guys are legends. The maths doesn't maths. In the broader context of the conversation, DC and Eddie Jordan are giving out flowers, praise. Susie Wolff gets her flowers due, which she deserves, right? Being super brave. What she's doing in terms of pressing criminal charges via the French courts for defamation because of what the FIA and Mohammed bin Sulayem have leveraged against her, being that she's fallen foul of some sort of conflict of interest based upon zero evidence. Absolutely, Susie Wolff is worthy of praise. But the way that these bods are talking about, yeah, she's brave and she's super competent, EJ says. What language are we using here, EJ? Like, what are you talking about? As if somehow because she's a woman, you wouldn't expect her to be... What are you talking about? She's a great girl, EJ continues. Okay, so I understand the type of podcast that we're listening to here in April of 2024. I get it. The language gives it away. But then we go on to Lewis Hamilton. Why isn't he also worthy of praise? If we're going to praise Susie, okay, so it's not apples and apples, but if we're going to praise Susie for talking out, then how are we going to criticise Lewis for not leading by example and only talking when times are controversial and polemic? This makes zero sense. I don't know. I don't know. The contrast, the juxtaposition of the tone in which they talk about Susie Wolff as versus Lewis Hamilton speaks volumes. I don't know. I'm not going to conclude anything on this call, but I'm just calling it into question. As I've listened back to it at least 10 to 20 times now, I'm like, what is going on here? Lead by example. That's the criticism that you're going to leverage at the 7-time champion, Sir Lewis, Carl Davidson, Hamilton. Lead by example. Have you watched Abu Dhabi 2021 and the grace with which this fella conducted himself in the most adverse of circumstances that we may ever see in F1? Have you seen this dude's Hamilton Commission and project for all of that stuff, all of his social justice campaigns that he fuels with his own money? Have you seen the way this dude conducts himself around the likes of Ollie Behrman and George Russell in recent years? The mentorship, the way that he's keen to bring, the way that he's invested in F1's future. Have you seen the way this dude speaks out about territories that have a very debatable, very checkered human rights record? Who else is doing this? DC and Eddie Jordan? Who else is leading by bloody example? It just doesn't make sense. I really want to put on my investigative cap and get to the bottom of this. This is what I'm trying to do in this soliloquy and monologue, but struggling nevertheless. Lead by example. David Coulthard, when have you ever spoken about the FIA? And especially, and you know what, I'll say this as well, because this is important, right? To be in retirement and then start speaking out is one thing, yeah. Because now, listen, you've not got any skin in the game. That's worthy of praise, kind of, but not really so much. Not in the same way that the guys and girls that are in the middle of their career, at their peak, and are speaking out then. For David Coulthard to be a commentator at Channel 4, okay, so he's got his production company and all that other good stuff. He has still got skin in the game. But as versus a Lewis Hamilton, who's got hundreds of millions in the game, the risk of Lewis speaking out is very different versus the risk of a David Coulthard speaking out. And yet, and still, I've never heard David Coulthard lead by example. And that's the terminology that he's using to criticise Sir Lewis Hamilton. I have no idea what's going on at this point. I don't know. I know I'm ranting and I know I'm scorched earth. I've taken 48 hours to think about this and try and process it and ingest it. And I don't understand what David Coulthard's talking about. Lead by example. Like these people, David Coulthard says, always like to talk in times of controversy. Well, when else are you going to lead by example as far as this stuff? That's the time, right? With Christian Horner and all that stuff going on, like transparency. Is that even a question that we need to ask? There's been zero transparency, Matthew. There has been zero transparency. Let's be honest and open as F1 fans. Now, whatever that means, okay, so it's an internal investigation. Red Bull GmbH Austria, they've processed the independent investigation via a KC, who ultimately is the lawyer that the Yavidra family, the 51% owners of Red Bull GmbH, have used. So you can call into question conflict of interest, whatever, especially bearing in mind the Yavidra family are a big fan of Christian Horner. Whatever. This is speculation and conjecture, but ultimately to say that this has been the beacon of transparency is ostensibly false. Lewis Hamilton hasn't said anything that nobody else is thinking. Red Bull can do whatever they want with Christian Horner. They can have him. He can spin off the F1 technology part of the business and run it by himself and become a share owner and conduct his career in the image of Toto Wolff if he wants. This is Red Bull. They are a private entity. They are not a PLC, and in that sense they can do absolutely what they want, what the shareholders desire. But yet and still to say, to breathe the words that this thing has been conducted with transparency in mind is an absolute nonsense. So Lewis Hamilton is 100% right to speak out about both the Christian Horner saga and the FIA saga with the same bloody descriptors, of course. Like, what do we do? Like, this stuff is F1 baloney, and yet again, one of the frequent occasions that has me questioning why I'm a fan of F1. Like, what are we? That these related parties continue to talk this F1 baloney that's evidently incorrect and false. Why are we doing this? You want to take aim at Lewis Hamilton for leading by example because he doesn't lead by example. That he only talks about this stuff in the controversial times. Like, what? Mate, honestly, genuinely, I have no clue what's going on here. And again, Suzuka Grand Prix this weekend, and we'll get into that. I'm about to go and film a news video, but sometimes I just need to... What's going on? DC and EJ. And the worst joke is, let me explain to you very quickly and finally. I love that bloody podcast, Formula for Success podcast. Go and check it out. It's God tier. Those two in Eddie Jordan and David Coulthard. If I'm going to praise them for a second, they speak their mind and it's a good podcast. They speak to the pertinent points going on in F1. And that's why I was so disappointed when I hear DC, and look, there's bias involved because DC is still a very good friend of Christian Horner, etc., etc. However, I was just disappointed. The person that you're going to criticise, not the other 19 drivers who rarely talk about this stuff, not the other related parties or team principals who, again, very rarely speak about the controversies and transparency and honesty. Anything that's not racing, you'll rarely hear Frederick Vasseur as an example. And not to take aim at Fred because he's a good guy, but just as an example, as a case in point, you'll very rarely hear the team principal of Scuderia Ferrari, whether that's Frederick Vasseur, Bonotto, or River Benny, talk about transparency and honesty in F1, right? Because they're not invested in it. They're not invested. So why not those guys lead by example? Why not the guys who never talk about the FIA, honesty, transparency, all of this other stuff that's external to what happens in the cockpit on a race day? Why not talk about those guys? Nah, you want to talk about Lewis Hamilton, who is the only one on the grid. Driver, team principal, engineer, regulator. He's the only one that you can accuse of leading by example on these non-race issues, being social justice, being some of the stuff that's going on around the world, being honesty, transparency of process. He's the only one. The irony is not lost on me then, DC, that he's the one that you accuse of being... of needing to lead by example, being convenient in the times when they talk about honesty, openness and transparency. Listen, I've had enough. The prosecution rests. No further questions, Your Honour.